Thousands of protesters took to the streets of Mexico City earlier this month to march against gentrification of the nation's capital. While most were peaceful but forthright in their chanting and slogans, some left a trail of destruction in their wake, smashing up businesses and even harassing foreigners. Mexico's relatively relaxed pandemic restrictions saw a large influx of new residents. So-called digital nomads were actively encouraged to move to the country to take advantage of relatively cheap living standards. But protesters believe the government's enticement has priced out locals and caused a flood of short-let and AirBnB properties in desirable central neighbourhoods.
Esto es consecuencia de que hay una poca regulación de plataformas digitales, de que hay un cártel inmobiliario que se trata de todos los partidos, no nada más es de un partido. Y esto viene desde antes de la pandemia, pero se ha recrudecido durante y después de la pandemia.
Para mí va a ser imposible, la verdad. Aunque aún tenga el sueño de querer un departamento donde vivir sola, pues realmente va a ser difícil. Por los precios.
La gentrificación solo es un paso más a la colonización, a los despojos y a que exploten nuestros recursos. Ahorita es con la gente, pero ya falta poco para que cuando se les acabe el petróleo, el agua, el litio en otro país, vengan y nos saquen.
In response, the city of almost 23 million's mayor is promising rent controls.
La ciudad no debe ser un privilegio de unos cuantos. Debe ser un derecho garantizado para todas y todos. El acceso a una vivienda adecuada se ha vuelto cada vez más difícil y más caro. He tenido a bien a emitir el siguiente bando 1 por una ciudad habitable y asequible con identidad y arraigo local. Primero, las rentas habitacionales en la Ciudad de México no pueden tener un aumento mayor a la inflación reportada por el Instituto.
Some of the protesters' tactics and xenophobic messaging have, though, raised concerns and been condemned by officials.
Las muestras xenofóbicas de esa manifestación hay que condenarlas. No puede ser que por una demanda, por más legítima que sea, que es la gentrificación, la demanda sea fuera cualquier nacionalidad de nuestro país. México ha sido solidario, fraterno siempre.
Not so fraternal, the US Department of Homeland Security highlighted the violent element on social media, urging Mexicans in America illegally to self-deport to join the protests back home. President Sheinbaum herself is held responsible for exacerbating the situation, having signed a deal with Airbnb and UNESCO in 2022 when she was mayor to boost tourism and attract remote workers. This an advert from her tenure promoting the capital as a world leader in digital connectivity. Similar protest movements have emerged in European cities like Berlin, Barcelona and Lisbon, with some authorities taking action to stem the growth in small lets to stop the purported hollowing out of neighbourhoods and communities. But experts are pointing to a slowdown in house building in Mexico City as the real reason for the rise in housing costs. City officials also look favourably on the estimated 35,000 Airbnb properties, as it's much easier to collect taxes from the platform compared with long-term rentals, which are commonly paid for with cash. With sky-high rents in US cities like LA and New York, coupled with the return of Donald Trump to the White House, American interest in moving to its southern neighbour is likely to continue to grow. Well, joining us now to discuss this is the journalist Nina Dos Santos, who's been covering the growing backlash in cities. Nina, you witnessed the boom in digital nomads in Mexico City over recent years. There was some active marketing, but there was also a lot of organic growth in the pandemic too.
Yes, I think that's right. I remember being there at the start of the pandemic, and you could see that, a lot of people had decided to up sticks from, say, parts of the United States when they had been given the right to work from home. Technology allowed that, and they decided to, lean into that experience economy. But since then, the numbers have soared, and obviously that has put huge pressure on local communities inside Mexico City because essentially locals are competing with people with Western style salaries who may stay there for 6 months or so, completely change a community. Boost the house prices as well, pricing locals out, and then just decide a few months later on to move on. And Mexico City isn't the only place in the world that is dealing with this type of issue. From Madrid to Berlin and Bali, you're hearing similar stories of people locally being exhausted with the phenomenon of over-tourism and also digitally mobile people setting up shop for 5 minutes and then moving on.
For the authorities, there are clear benefits, aren't there, like residents with higher disposable incomes and easier tax collection from platforms like Airbnb.
Yeah, that's right. So we have to distinguish there's two things going on. On the one hand, you have the digital nomad phenomenon, which, as I said, is somebody sort of armed with a laptop who can work from anywhere in the world. And they might rent an Airbnb for a few weeks, a few months. But you also, in some of these countries, have the phenomenon of sort of wealth and taxation tourism, which is a whole other ballgame that in places like, for instance, Madrid and also Lisbon in particular, has really changed the real estate market for a long time. We're talking about countries that are not just offering digital nomads the opportunity to come and work there at a tax advantageous rate for a short period of time. They're also saying if you invest a large amount of money in the local real estate market, well, then you can have a golden visa, you can have residency in an EU country. And that has really caused some house prices to soar, and it's locked in this phenomenon that has locked out locals. You can't blame some of these countries, though, for wanting the extra growth. If you look at the UK, Rachel Reeves, presumably the Chancellor, would love to attract this type of talent and also get this type of growth going. Lisbon, by the way, and Portugal was a country that suffered enormously economically during its bailout, the Eurozone bailout, about a decade and a half ago. And the first thing that it decided to do was focus heavily on tourism and also attract this type of mobile talent. That did help to boost the economy, but obviously locals in places like Lisbon and Porto will say they've paid a massive price for that.
And in terms of the negatives, how serious an issue can it be for the balance of cities?
Well, what we're seeing is lots of local people being priced out. I know Lisbon very well because I have family there, and I've got to say the nature of the city in the last 10 years has absolutely transformed. Now, for tourists, that's great because there's lots of options. There's lots of sort of Western style restaurants. And for some locals, they'll say, well, look, the quality of services and the internationalization of what was a sleepy city is great. But if you look at some of the numbers, you can see that even a city like Lisbon, the capital of Portugal, is really struggling to cope. It's got a population of about 500,000 people, but 16,000 digital nomads at one point were living there in any given year. And it's also visited by about 6.5 million tourists. So you can see where the frustrations are boiling over in places like Lisbon and Barcelona, that as well, just like Portugal, Spain, and in particular the city of Barcelona, did a lot to attract digital talent, and they also faced local protests. In Rome, we've seen people attacking Airbnb key holders to try and get locals to realize that, yes, they might make a quick buck on this phenomenon, but the culture of a city and its people will suffer in years to come.
Are the concerns sort of much the same on both sides of the Atlantic?
I think they are. So Mexico City is dealing with a particular phenomenon, which is obviously the strength of the US dollar and the fact that there's a growing technology community that is mobile that can come from north of the border. Also remember that there are bilateral tensions between the United States and Mexico, particularly over economic issues and trade. But Mexico also knows that it has to defend its tourism industry. It cannot put up with these types of protests without, calling them out, which is why you've seen the president, Claudia Sheinbaum, say that she's not going to put up with what she calls xenophobia and anti-tourism sentiment, because they also have to protect other resorts that Americans frequent on the west coast of Mexico and also on what is now the Gulf of Mexico, according to the United States, on the eastern side and the Caribbean coast. So she has to think about tourism as a whole, as a huge part of her economy. So Mexico has an issue coming in particular with money from the United States. But Europe is different. Europe has people coming from all over the world, including the strong dollar, work from home generation as well. And this phenomenon is spreading as far afield as Bali, where we've seen a burgeoning community of cryptocurrency entrepreneurs set up shop largely from Eastern Europe there. And that has brought with it problems with regards to organized crime. It's brought all sorts of issues with regards to lack of housing, and also it threatens the actual tourism industry in Bali itself. So these pressures are coming from different parts of the world, and it's incumbent upon the United Nations Tourism Authority, the UNWTO, that is set up to try and help make tourism sustainable and an economic benefit for all, to try and come up with a strategy to encourage some of these places in the world to limit visitor numbers before tensions boil over locally.
Cities like Barcelona and Mexico City have long been tourist hubs, but Mexico City now, like Lisbon, has really sort of pushed itself to be a city for digital nomads. Are the sort of benefits worth it?
This is an interesting one. I'm interested in why Mexico City has decided to embrace this idea of becoming a hub for the technology community. If anybody has been to Mexico City, it's very different to other parts of Mexico. It's smaller than you expect. You can walk around it. It's a very romantic, atmospheric, multicultural city. And now, obviously, technology and technological advances mean that so many people can work from home, and technology is a much bigger industry in the United States than it might have been, say, 20 odd years ago, which is why obviously it's understandable that Mexico has wanted to attract this type of talent. I think the numbers coming from the United States are quite sharp, and obviously the power that the US dollar has, because people are earning so much more over there, really makes the situation more acute in Mexico perhaps than it does with regards to other European cities.
And politicians may have liked the increased tax revenues, but we've seen these protests. But have voters actually been making their feelings known at the ballot boxes and kicking out these mayors and councilmen who facilitated this?
Well, you're already seeing a big backlash in Portugal. Portuguese politicians over successive governments of left and right have continued up until very recently to espouse this policy of attract digital talent, give preferential tax treatment to people from elsewhere to attract them to Portugal. And that has caused a lot of irritation among the Portuguese, who themselves say, well, look, we're pummeled by never-ending tax rises. Salaries are not keeping pace with the increasing cost of living, something that people in the UK will be familiar with as a phenomenon. And why should we put up with this? And now finally, Portugal, especially in local hotspots like Lisbon, where this problem has become so acute, have had to start changing the laws. So recently, Lisbon ended its scheme to try and attract digital nomads. Those who are already there will still be protected with the tax preferential treatment that they were awarded before. But now those kind of tax breaks are no longer politically palatable. And that may well be something that we see spreading to other cities, as you were saying before, around Europe. That said, though, there are always other locations who are willing to pick up the trend thereafter. Montenegro is trying to attract digital nomads. Bulgaria, Albania has a huge digital nomad community that has sprung up after people got exhausted with the numbers of digital nomads in, say, Spain and also Italy. So there's always somebody willing to welcome this digitally mobile talent with its powerful euros and dollars.
Nina Dos Santos, thank you very much.
Thank you.